Just give me a minute. Hold on. Why is this doing that? Okay. Well, that is strange. I'm pulling up an old meeting. Let me try it again. I beg your pardon. All right, I think we're good to go.
We appear to be live.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Scarborough Downtown Development Committee. We may have another committee member still to join, but we can get rolling. We know we're not going to be without Brian Shumway tonight and without the developers, Dan and Rocky. They had another evening commitment to attend to. So I'll open tonight's meeting and let's begin with review of the from the minutes from our previous meeting. Can I have a motion on the minutes from our last meeting?
So moved.
Art moves approval. Do I have a second?
Yeah, second.
Second from Basha. Is there any discussion, questions, adjustments? Kim?
I have an adjustment. I wasn't at the last meeting, but it
Okay.
says I was, which is not a big deal. I don't know how official these meetings need to be, minutes need to be, but
We did assign several legal responsibilities to you at the last
oh,
meeting, so,
great.
but we'll adjust the meeting to indicate that you weren't with us. So are there any other notes or adjustments? There's Tom. We're fully attended for what we expect tonight. Seeing none. Motion with an amendment to represent that Kim was not with us at the last meeting. It's on the floor. I see no other comments. All in favor, please say aye or wave to the
Aye.
screen.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Unanimous. Okay. Look at our agenda. I believe the developer report is next. The developers are not with us tonight. As I mentioned, they have a conflict. Dan did send an email to me, and he just asked me to let the committee know that they continue to work with Goody Clancy, which is the consultant firm that they've hired for the downtown, to progress on plans for the committee to review and react to. I also do just want to call attention to the email that Dan sent to us over the weekend. Did everybody receive the email from Dan?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a valuable conversation. For those of you watching or who maybe didn't get a chance to see it, the developers are concerned about how the project may be bumping up against the growth ordinance, and it's largely driven by their short and long-term plans for housing at and around the downtown. And so I think if it makes sense to everybody, it probably is a conversation that ought to start with the regulatory committee. Brian is on the committee, and so are Sarah and Kim. Brian asked if that could be referred to that committee, and I think that probably makes sense for us to start there and to maybe invite Dan and Rocky to that meeting to get a full download from them of where the differences may be, and if there's even a place for this committee to get engaged and weigh in or not. Tom, I see your hand up.
Well, would it be helpful to take a few minutes just to kind of provide some context from the council perspective?
Absolutely. I think it would be great to start with some context from you and from John and John, if they're willing. And then maybe at the end of it, we can sort of kick this over to the regulatory committee.
Yeah, I guess I had referred to Councillor Clucci just because he has been kind of the driving force in the last 6 weeks or so. And I think John and I might have some other comments after, if that's okay.
Okay, yep, I'm opening it up to you guys to talk about the message from the developers as much as you're interested.
So just forewarning that my computer keeps telling me I have an unstable internet connection. So if you lose me, just let me know. So we've been working on growth management for, geez, almost 18 months now, and in different phases of committee work, but it's now at the council. It's been accelerated a little bit over the past couple of months because we ran out of growth permits in January of this year for fiscal year 21. We've never really hit that other than the end of last year. We've never really run out of growth permits. So the growth management ordinance has been a tool that we use to help direct where growth happens more rapidly than other areas of town. And we've been pretty effective at driving it towards our core center, our activity centers. When the ordinance was written 20 years ago, we didn't have many apartments in town. The focus was really on alleviating an increased burden on our infrastructure, schools, and everything else due to a rapid expansion of single-family homes in town. So that's what the ordinance was designed for, and it was pretty effective at stabilizing single-family development over time. We've actually seen a dip in single-family development over the past couple of years. So we have in front of us right now at the council level an amendment to the existing ordinance that would relieve some of the property owners who are looking to develop in the near term. There are some issues with that where it doesn't necessarily conform with our comprehensive plan, and it doesn't address the issue that the Downs has, that the Crossroads Development District has. So after we brought that forward, we did a lot of work to actually do a complete repeal replace version of the growth management ordinance that does allow a pathway for developments like the Downs to do what they need to do with council approval. It also provides some exemptions for certain classes of development, like one-bedroom apartments or condos, affordable housing, manufactured housing, if it's in a manufactured housing park. And within the Downs, we actually are preparing an exemption for 1- and 2-bedroom multifamily developments through the end of the year. It's time bound right now because, well, one, that's what we think we can get support for. And two, we don't have a lot of good data on the Downs yet because they've only just started building out. So it's a measured approach. And I think as they should, the developers of the Downs are looking to get more than that, which they should lobby and act, for their position, I think. And I think to the extent that this committee can help clarify their needs, I think that it could go somewhere with the council. I think it's pretty well known amongst us that are involved here that you need a certain core of development and certainly population base to have a successful downtown, right? So that fact alone doesn't necessarily drive with the growth management mechanism that we currently use. So I think that's about as much of the history that I can give. We're going to have a workshop on Thursday where we go through the document in detail and debate basically the components of the proposed ordinance. And then we're currently scheduled to vote on it next week. But that doesn't mean that the growth management work will be done. We still have to adopt a new comprehensive plan. And I anticipate that over the next 6 to 12 months, we'll continue this discussion, particularly as it relates to the Downs.
Thank you, John.
I think it would be interesting, whatever the GMO ends up getting approved, because some like John said, based on the timeline, some of their concerns might get alleviated based on the changes that might come forward by early May. And that might be a way to look at the downtown as you guys work with the consultant to say, under this pace of growth and how the Downs is able to develop, what does that mean in terms of what we can anticipate this downtown to look like? And then if they still feel like there are other things that would allow them to do more, what would those things be? Because I think at the end of the day, right, I think this group is charged with helping identify potential regulatory changes. And if some of those changes come back to where you guys say, hey, based on the ordinance that, the council put forward and approved potentially by May, there are opportunities for additional changes that could actually have a better impact for what the downtown could be. So I don't think that that's necessarily off the table for you guys to kind of take that into consideration and partner with them to look at, you know, whatever is approved early May, what does that mean in terms of what the downtown could be? And then what are things from a regulatory perspective around growth that the council could consider in the future that might actually help to you know, make it even better?
Yeah, I would just offer a final cautionary note. This is complicated, and so taking a deep dive is probably not something the committees should be doing or is capable of doing, and that's no disrespect meant. It really, there's a lot of moving parts to this. So having said that, it is related, and you know, the Crossroads District by design is a mixed-use development that each part relies on the other. So it's a three-legged stool in many respects. So I think there's fertile ground for you to kind of poke into, but just be careful going too deep. And I can certainly talk to Brian with that cautionary note as well.
Yeah, I think that, you know, the challenge for us, and maybe for, you know, the four of us in the regulatory committee first, is to bear in mind that our responsibility is sort of a visioning exercise for what we want the downtown to be and what we want it to look and feel like. It's not our job to solve this. It's not our responsibility to thread the needle on the growth management ordinance that makes the developers happy and the town happy. It's our responsibility to say, what, you know, I guess to this specific question, what does housing look like in the downtown in our mind? And, you know, to be clear, in our non-expert minds, but in our minds as members of the public who have the opportunity to learn a bit and weigh in. And so I think so long as we keep that lane and focus, you know, our goal is to gain enough information about sort of the delta between their vision and the GMO, purely to understand what it is that we want to share with the council about what housing should look like to us in the downtown. And I think that may not require us testifying on specific changes to the GMO, but it may just be a matter of us saying, we talked about housing, we got some information about sort of the benefits of density at a certain level, and here's what we'd like to see. And I think that's probably the limits of our responsibility, and also, you know, to Tom's point, of our capability of grasping this late into the process.
Yeah, I mean, it is an opportunity, not an opportunity, but certainly housing that would occur within the downtown is clearly within your mandate. I don't know how much of that will occur. I think we need to know more about that. It strikes me that it's not going to be single family, so it's likely to be at least exempt in the near term.
Yeah.
But I think this is one of those areas where you can actually look and should think about beyond the downtown, because what happens proximate to the downtown is going to affect in part, maybe large part, how successful and vibrant that downtown is. I mean, it strikes me the single most important ingredient is people in that downtown. And of course, things to attract them. But ideally, it's people that walk to the area, so they live on campus. We've talked about the opportunity for people to, it being a destination as well. And I think we need to provide for that. But I think this is an area where you can actually broaden your gaze a little bit beyond the 25 or 30 acres that we're talking about as the downtown.
How
Excellent.
many units are already approved, and how many are already there, and how many are in construction? In the whole Downs?
You know, I can't even hazard a guess. John, do you have that handy?
I don't. I could get what was in progress as of last April, but I don't have the what's been approved piece and what's currently being built.
You know, I suggested that this might be a good regulatory committee subject, but this actually might be something good to put on our agenda for the whole committee at our next meeting. A conversation with Dan and Rocky about housing in general, including questions like, you know, where are they now and how far into what's approved have they built, and what's their vision, and why is it bumping up against the GMO art?
Right.
Yeah, part of that for me, my question, would any of this growth ordinance be a hindrance to the developers meeting their benchmarks?
Not directly. The benchmarks are all based on, well, I shouldn't say that. They're based on non-residential square footage. And certain multifamily apartment buildings in particular are considered non-residential for that purpose. Is there a commercial venture? It's a residential use, but it's a commercial venture. So yes,
Yeah,
potentially.
and I suspect that they feel that they need, in order to draw some of that commercial development, they need certain households to be there as well. So it is definitely related, but then there's also the question is how much can we absorb as a town without overwhelming infrastructure and particularly our schools. So it's a balancing act.
Thank you.
So to answer the question, what's been built, I mean, there's a fair amount under construction as we speak, Kim. So this is a check-in they had with us in September last year. So 30 single-family homes, that's where Basha lives, I believe. 48 condo units, 48 apartments, and 12 assisted living at that time. You could probably double that. There's a fair amount under construction right now.
Okay.
So let's, Tody, if you're listening, let's have this be an agenda item for our next meeting for all of us. And I think that we'll ask Dan and Rocky to be prepared to dive into this subject matter at a deeper level than a developer report. Also, Tody, if you're listening, I was wrong on attendance. We're also missing Bruce Zivick tonight. So
yep.
We are not entirely attended. Brian, Bruce, and the developers are not here. So is there anything else? Does anybody else want to weigh in on this specific subject, or should we just plan on getting into it much deeper in 2 weeks?
Travis, I would just say that if my math's right, is your next meeting before, when is the next meeting? The council's due to vote on this on May 5th, so it could be done. That's not to say it's not a matter you don't want to talk about, but does anyone know what the date of
Our
the
next
next
meeting would be 2 weeks from today.
The 11th, May 11th.
So frankly, we're on a path for the council to have taken final action by then. Perhaps the developer could still share their observations, whether they like or dislike or need further changes.
And I think there's still room for committee involvement because there's a sunset provision as it's currently being proposed where the Downs exemption would expire at the end of the year. So that in itself is, there's going to be cause for us to continue to make refinements specifically for the Crossroads District because we don't think we've got it completely figured out yet.
I mean, that might be the sort of broad recommendations this committee, might land on, that the exemption should continue beyond the year. I'm not saying that's what you should do, but it would be that kind of higher level recommendation and provide some backup to it.
And the exemption is the multifamily exemption?
1 and 2 bedroom multifamily as it's currently worded.
I think it's unlikely that a special meeting among this committee would result in any kind of useful recommendation that might change the direction of that vote. So it probably makes sense to do, like you said, Tom, which is we should still talk about it. And John, and if there are outgrowth recommendations from what the developers' final thoughts are and what our committee's final thoughts are, we certainly can continue to weigh in on it.
Okay, I'll make sure it's on the agenda.
Okay. All right, committee reports. Subcommittee, we did not receive, unless any individual members received comment from the public. We don't have any new communications. Grandstand committee remains on ice. Modeling committee, did you meet in the interim?
We did, and I think at this point I'm speaking on behalf of the modeling and downtown district committee, so I'll just kind of merge them into one. But we'll start with modeling. We had a busy week on both fronts, I think, for both committees. Modeling specifically, Kim Bridgham was able to connect with one of the folks who was working on the Mashpee Commons project. She's written up a summary for us into email that went out to the subcommittee members, which I will make public in the folder for everybody. We'll get the comments sort of aggregated for everybody's review, and then we'll have those presented with the final report. Essentially what we're doing right now is we're doing this world tour. I was also able to connect with one of the original folks who worked on the development of Blueback Square down in West Hartford. So we're able to do some good research on some of the pitfalls of those projects, as well as where their focus was, and while they were going through those developments, what took up a lot of their time as the project went on, where they found a lot of their attention needed to go in order to really maximize the projects that they were doing. So we'll have both of those sort of typed up and available for everyone in the near term. My conversation happened on Sunday, so I wasn't able to put that into anything formal quite yet. But I think we've got some useful stuff there. A lot of what we're finding is that parking is going to be probably a bigger conversation than we've realized so far. A lot of the pitfalls and a lot of the continuing struggles for these developments surround the parking issues. My conversation specifically, just to give you a little highlight into that conversation, they have metered parking at Blueback Square, and that parking is limited. Even you have to pay for it, and it's very limited, which is a real pain for the residents, because there is civic use involved as well. So in order to go register your vehicle at City Hall, you've got to pay for parking. So it's kind of a pain point even at this juncture. And then there's a lot of because there's not enough parking, a lot of that spills into surrounding areas, which has the residents of those areas still upset. And this is, been a 17-year issue essentially at this point for the folks down there. So we'll have those summarized, but we're essentially starting to aggregate this into a presentation that we'll be able to give to everybody, sort of backing some of these models that we've been able to reach out to, putting together some good data that can allow us to take these models and apply the experiences that they've had and try to project that information into the project that we have in front of us here. So I think we're on the right track for that. Bruce has done some good work putting together how that information should be compiled. And then right now we're just doing the legwork to get it all put together. So it'll be a little bit more research on our end, but then I would expect that information to start coming in and coming together quickly. So we should have something final for you here in the next couple of meetings, I would imagine.
I'm just curious, you spoke with the developer at Blueback?
Her name was Mary Ann, top of my head, I don't have the notes in front of me, but she was the liaison between the developer and the city when it came to the approvals for the inspections.
Oh, that's a really unique perspective.
Yeah, so she saw some very interesting overlap, especially she had some great comments on mixed use in general, and some of the problems that they found over time when mixed use, especially that sort of first floor retail, restaurant, and upper level living setup. She had some good insights into that. So I'll try to get all that information into something digestible for everybody.
And then I'm just curious, Kim, who were you able to connect with in Mashpee?
You're on mute, Kim.
Kim.
I spoke to the assistant town manager at
Oh, good.
Mashpee, who
Yep.
was like so open, and he's like, call me anytime, happy to talk to anybody. But he was interesting too. He mentioned parking. Sorry, my phone's ringing. And more, he didn't mention the pay parking that I think was the issue that Tom was referring to, but just making sure parking was close to the restaurants, et cetera. If it's too far away, people won't, park there and walk in the cold or walk in the rain or, but he, they're actually doing some redevelopment right now at Mashpee, and they're going before the Cape Cod Commission. I'm probably not using the right word, but they're looking to change things up a little bit and do the, retail on the bottom, owner occupy above. That's kind of one of the things that they're looking at. And I think the developer is actually hoping to sell the buildings, some of the buildings to the owner occupants. So that was interesting. The developer's name is Buff. I forget his last name. It's in my email, but he also did a development in Providence, Rhode Island. And there's quite an interesting article about that process. But the assistant town manager said, that he thought that Buff would be willing to talk to anybody as well. He's the developer is about an 80-year-old man, but his daughter's taking over the business.
Well, good. I appreciate all your efforts there. I think there'll be some good insight.
Great.
And then I guess I'll continue with the floor to move over to the Downtown District Committee. So we met actually earlier today after we had gotten the email from Dan about the the growth ordinance coming into play. So we had a little bit more of a cautionary approach, trying to get a little bit more information on that front while we try to understand what the ramifications were for that. But mostly with that meeting today, we started really looking at, hold on, just pull on my notes here. We started looking at the 2018 plan that was provided to us earlier on. Let me see if I can just pull up the name of it so I'm pointing everyone in the right direction. It is called the Downtown Revitalization Plan, a Downtown for Scarborough. We started pulling out some of the information from that was very relevant to our committee, and we started putting that into a final report. We're basically trying to organize our thoughts on each of the access points. And in addition to that, the connectivity to the greater downtown area up at Oak Hill. So there's movement on that front as well. We'll be probably, I'd say, a couple weeks out on a report coming in on that end as well. We still have a little bit more research to do to get a full plan together, but we do need to pick Dan's brain on a few things, and we were hoping to have some of his time tonight, but we'll have to reach out to him separately. We really are trying to understand some of the changes that may have happened on that between that report and now. And then we're looking for some more comment on parking plans, which seems to be a theme now, but also how the street plans have changed and what has been determined for the specific entrances up to this point. I think that there's been some movement specifically on the Route 1 entrance already on what can and can't happen there. So we're hoping to get a frame of reference as we start to put those ideas to paper.
Tom, if it helps you, Karen Martin, whom I think joined us a couple weeks ago, was the chief author of that plan. So if there are questions, she would be a great resource. I can make the connection for you if you like.
I think I have her email. We exchanged emails a couple times so far, so I can reach out to her as we calibrate on those. Thank you.
I'm pleased to help too, but she really was heavily involved.
Great.
Thank you, Tom. Does anybody have questions for Tom or any of the other committees? Seeing none, before we move on to the fun part of tonight's agenda, I do just want to give Tom Hall a couple of minutes to walk through the document that he shared earlier this afternoon, which was a map of projects that are happening around the Downs and the downtown. Tom, do you want to take a couple of minutes to talk about that?
Sorry, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so Karen Martin pulled this together with assistance from the planning office. You'll note, obviously Scarborough Downs is right here where my cursor is. So she went fairly far afield. I mean, some of these are way down by Little Dolphin, and then of course, all the activity along the parkway. I guess of note, I would just mention, this is the cottages. We've mentioned it several times. I think it's a total of 92 dwellings, and this is immediately adjacent to Scarborough Downs. This is where there'll be some connectivity potential. They have rights of way that will end at the property line on either side of their property. And on the screen, excuse me, the second page, there's a legend that goes with it, if you want to know some of the particulars. So really all sorts of development, residential, all sorts of commercial types. I'm not sure, Travis, if you want to kind of walk through these individually, or is a resource for people to certainly draw from. And we
Yeah,
can
I mean,
provide.
I think you shared it to our shared drive. If anybody wants to, if anybody has questions about any of these projects or wants to open discussion on them, we have some time and certainly open for further discussion. I'm not seeing or hearing anybody. Sorry, who was?
One thing I'll just mention, and this is a critical issue that the town and the Downs have been working for almost the entire time of their existence. They need to secure a traffic movement permit. So they need to have the ability to have this permit, and to get that permit, they need to model what their likely impact is. On a single lot development, this is a very standard and typical part of the planning process. For a project of their scope and size and duration, it's a bit more challenging. They've been modeling 3,000 trip generation, which is about a 2/3 build out for them. They say they've spent about $1 million with consultants to understand what those models, and it's produced a really detailed product that not only indicates what their on-site, I say on-site, kind of the 3 points that they touch, Payne Road, Route 1, and Higas Parkway, but more importantly, the off-site impacts. So these models are very detailed. They estimate where the trips will be going, what effects those trips have on the various intersections. And literally, this is town-wide. And the reason I bring this up, I think it's going on as we speak. We're very, very close to actually having them get their new permit, which is critically important for them to keep, selling land and developing land. Right now, they're essentially out of trips. But the key to this is that it's really kind of a three-way partnership. The town will be involved using impact fees that we've collected over time from other developers that we've not put them to use. So we now have a chance to leverage new big private money, and DOT is actually putting in $3 million toward the effort. So in a 5-year time frame, there's about $13.5 million in traffic improvements programmed, which is going to be a big deal for us, obviously. So I mentioned it. It's one of the issues, many issues the Downs is wrestling with, along with growth management and downtown and so on and so forth. So they've got a lot going on, but that's a real bright spot, I think, and something that we're going to have to give a lot more time and attention to over the next couple of months. And I guess the reason I thought of it looking at this screen, one of the reasons DOT is really insisting on them doing this longer range view as opposed to project by project, is that all projects that come after them needing to get traffic movement permits, the assumption is the improvements that a prior developer is committed to are made. And what happens if they aren't made in a short period of time, it has this cascading effect, and it's nearly impossible for DOT to properly assign mitigation efforts to subsequent developers. So this is really, I don't believe a traffic study of this size, scope, and magnitude has ever been done in the state of Maine. And unfortunately, the Downs is the first one, but they have really stepped up to the challenge, hired some really good professional consultants, and worked cooperatively with the town and DOT. So it's a big deal for all involved, for sure.
And that's principally at sort of the entrance points to the Downs, Tom, or is that farther?
Well, interestingly, the traffic movement permit, this $13.5 million, doesn't include any of the points they touch. So it doesn't include the access road that they will be building Center Street out to Parkway here. It doesn't include their connection to Payne Road or Route 1. That's all on their dime. Those are considered on-site improvements at their cost 100%. These are impacts beyond their borders.
Excellent. Kim Bridgen, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, and maybe this will be answered in future, but I'm looking at, when we think about a discussion about units and accessibility and having density. So that 17 and 18 on this map, that's 110 single family homes, I guess. And I would just be curious, like, how far is the walk from there to where the downtown would be situated? I think that's an important data point.
Yeah. Yeah, we can scale those off for you, but from this project, 17, the 92 single families, it is incredibly close, and I would expect there will be great overlap there.
Okay.
And for our part, and Sarah can chime in here, but we've also talked about connecting the municipal campus over there, which I think will be equally important for another population, particularly if there start to be civic amenities on the downside. The library is the most recent conversation point, but there could be others.
I might get all those high schoolers walking over there for lunch.
They
Any
discover
other
El
questions?
Rayo.
Yeah, right.
Anything else? Any other questions on that map? I think it's useful, some useful background for us, but may not all that directly affect our specific focus on the downtown. But I think it's definitely something we asked for, and I was glad to see. Thank you, Tom.
Tom, we can provide you a more granular level exactly where the connection points are physically. And I don't know if you have interest in getting that detailed, but we can show you very clearly where those connection points are most logical.
That would be ideal. It's all work that we've got to do anyway. So to get out in front of that, that'd be great. A lot of our conversations have been around Route 1 kind of access, walkability to this point. And because that is, if you look at the map, where that zone sort of tracks. But it will definitely be, I think, imperative that there's some sort of access to that other area through the municipal side that doesn't impact the residents who are there already. So
yeah, I'll do some work and provide you directly some details for those adjoining subdivisions, and so you can see exactly where those connection points are.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
I have, yeah. So Tom, so we are talking about the Oak Hill area, right? So the previous secure safety building that is been repurposing into business or something else, the opposite to that El Rodeo, the previous fire station, that one has been development. So is there any other plans for the Oak Hill area, the old downtown that we call, where Hannaford, all of that Starbucks and those Walgreens, McDonald's, that area, right? So is there any plan to, because that is also part of downtown that we are calling it as for the Scarborough downtown. So is there any scope for doing any development, or are we going to use as is the same current setup and then see how it can, because those are all only businesses. So
sure.
those does not have any other different amenities. I do not know any scope is there or not, but if you want to see like the whole downtown, so is there any proposal on growth or any other ideas floating around for Oak Hill?
I can't report that there are any imminent development plans. I think I can say that we'll see infill development as lots are built on, or redeveloped, if you will. I would say the two biggest opportunities, in my opinion, one would be the land in front of the new Town and Country Federal Credit Union building. That's owned, interestingly enough, by Risbara, and they have no long-term, I know this for certain, they have no long-term interest in housing their business out of that location, and I think have long had some redevelopment plans, and that's a fairly sizable parcel in that region. And then there's a fair amount of undeveloped land behind Hannaford, kind of in the same region, and that's raw vacant land at this point, owned by the Foley brothers, and I think there's pretty tremendous development opportunity there. Again, nothing imminent, but those are the two that come to mind in terms of biggest opportunities in Oak Hill proper.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Tom.
Okay. So the last item on our agenda, and I think that, it might be useful for us to take a few minutes to talk about how we want to go about doing this, and whether it's something that we try and do all here this evening, or whether it's something that we introduce this evening and then ask folks to kind of work on their own and send separately, or what. Certainly open to suggestions, but I hope everybody saw the email that I forwarded from John Anderson suggesting that we step back from some of these in the weeds conversations that we're having, and just have everybody take some time and talk about what your top three dreams or visions for the downtown are. I assume that everybody volunteered to give up your Tuesday nights because you have something that you'd like to see happen there. And I certainly do. And we dove in pretty quickly on some pretty deep stuff, but I think it would be a great exercise, and probably also very timely as an introduction to the contractors the developers have hired, for us to just talk about what we would like to see of the downtown and what we would like to see there. And so maybe, before we just kind of go around the loop and ask everybody to read their list, it might make sense to talk about how we want to collect this data, because I think that it's probably something that we should try to present in writing to the developers and their contractors before we even get the chance to meet with them, so they get a sense of where we're coming from. And I'm sure there are going to be some ideas that are shared among many or all of us, and there may be some ideas that, when brought out into light, are revealed to be completely insane. So it probably makes sense for us to take a couple of minutes and talk about how do we want to go about collecting our vision document, so long as it doesn't involve us forming a subcommittee to talk about developing our vision document. Let's take a few minutes tonight and decide, do we want to give everybody who wants a turn to talk a turn to talk, or do we want to come up with a list of points that we want everybody to hit and have everyone work on that in writing over the week? What does everybody think? John, this started with you. Tell us where this came from and what you'd like to see us do with it.
Yeah, I was just suggesting, since there's time built in between now and the contractors, just hearing from you guys what you want to see there, just to make sure that, we start to form a basis of key things that you guys would like to see. Because again, I think part of this group is representing the wants and needs of the community. And I think there's been so much great work kind of doing research and having discussions and really kind of digging into a lot of meaty details, but we still haven't yet heard from this group. What do you want down there? And again, some of those things might be like very specifics, which I think is okay to share, because those specifics might lead to some themes or things to help you guys kind of draft that vision document and start to get consensus a little bit around some key things. And so, since it was my idea, maybe I can share some of my thoughts with you guys just to kind of get the ball rolling if you want. I think if you read the email, I put some stuff in there, but I thought of new things that I want this week. So I can share some of those too. So like many people in the community, I got a COVID puppy during COVID. And one of the things I've noticed as we've tried to be more active is there's so many trails in Scarborough, but there really isn't like a dog park. And I don't think there's any. I think the closest one is in Westbrook that we haven't gone to. And knowing that, the human animal bond is so powerful and so many people nowadays have pets and dogs. And I imagine a lot of the residents who are going to be living in the Downs are going to want green space to bring their pets to walk. And I personally would love to be able to take my dog to a field and throw the ball, not necessarily have to go to a park or go to a trail. So I'd love to see something like a dog park, like, again, very specific, but I feel like, not only would that serve the residents that live in the community, a lot of people, there's a big dogs group in Scarborough that many of you might know. So I know there's a lot of dog lovers in Scarborough. So I think that would be something that would potentially draw people, and also kind of have that green space. So that was one thing. Another thing that I thought of, again, was I have kids who are 6 and 8, and they're not big into like winter sports yet. So like skiing, snowshoeing, that's just not something that they're into. My 6-year-old will be outside for 2 minutes before she wants to go back in. So we don't want to go skiing knowing she won't want to do it, but we really do need better indoor places for kids, I think, to be able to go to and do fun activities. I know there's the Edge complex, so that might meet some of that need down the road. But again, just like places for young children to be able to like let loose, especially in the winter months, run around, have some fun, have activities where mom and dad can relax for a little bit while the kids are busy. Like I always feel like those are good things for at least that demographic of people with young kids. And then again, just thinking of like, now that the weather's getting nice, you know, I'd love the idea of having like a center stage somewhere, and the downtown area where, you know, again, it could like double as like a movie screen where I could see you doing like summer movie nights, you know, for families or for kids, not necessarily a drive-through, but almost like a drive-through. I guess it could be something similar to that, but also it could like double as a stage for music and activities and events and things within the community. So those are just like some of the things I thought of like recently that I would really appreciate to have there, that I don't really feel there's someplace close where I could get that same experience that would at least draw me to want to go down there and visit and enjoy it.
John, I'm so glad you went first. So my Ferris wheel idea doesn't sound so.
Yeah.
Tom, do you want to take a minute to present your grown-up frat party business that you forwarded to me earlier this week? It looked very exciting and fun.
I forget the name of that.
I'm being facetious. It was like a fun park for yard games and.
It was, and I'm afraid I'm probably too old to go to it, but it did look like a hell of a lot of fun. There seemed to be libation in every picture of some sort or another, but all sorts of interesting sports. Help me out, Travis.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of think of like Jokers outside for maybe more for adults than.
Think of Chuck E. Cheese for adults.
Chuck E. Cheese for adults, yeah. And I think if you want to share that link, I mean, we may want to start a folder in our shared drive for some of these ideas of just stuff that we like.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear more of this if anybody else would like to go. Who saw that email and thought they have a list that they want to share with us?
Half of them actually John stole from me. Especially I was actually I lived in Dubai. That is mostly entertainment purposes. So they had the Dubai festival, yearly festival like that. So now Scarborough as a Downs, we do have a big opportunity because the Old Port Festival is gone. So maybe we can have a Scarborough Festival, something like that, which we can build. But that again falls into the category of having some kind of an auditorium or the small open space that can be used as a, create a stage in the middle, which can be used as a, music festivals or corporate events. Like if IDEX or VEX wants to do their employee engagement or something, they can do it. That is one of them that can drive, but again, it links to how much of parking space and all of those things comes into picture. That's one that I had. And another one is I completely agree with John's, the sentiment where as a family and kids, when we go to some place, I don't want to have, division. If I go to that place, I want to spend like a couple of hours or 2 to 3 hours. So that can accommodate younger kids to maybe my kids will take another 10 years to go into the teenage. but we should have some kind of play area, maybe bowling alley, or maybe Tom Madden can do that Pine Point Brewery, which has the games, which I know the Hibachi. I saw there are some games in Otto's Pizza, and somewhere in Westbrook they have, because IDEX generally takes us for parties, so like those for celebration. So we had a lot of those small indoor events, part of those breweries or part of the restaurants, where you can go with the family. Kids can have their arcade games or the small bowling or maybe dart or something like that. And whereas we as adults can do their own socializing or other stuff. So that's another one. So the another one, the fascinating thing that I had was I correlate myself. We do not have a waterfront in the Downs, like a pier or anything. But when I used to live in Los Angeles, I used to go to the pier, Santa Monica Pier, where it's, even though it's on the ocean side, but you have the big, almost the big arcade, which has Ferris wheel, like a London Eye type of thing for the kids. I mean, we do have the whole arcade, but we don't need to have that big kind of thing. But maybe the smaller version of thing which can entertain all the families, which includes maybe the teenagers also. So, like these are the some of the things. Especially the festival idea is the one which drives me into, which creates a business opportunity for local businesses and as well as established business in the Downs area and the downtown. And at the same time, it drives the people. Maybe we can have a coffee or the movies or the bowling alley or something like that. But I can write it down. I have so many things. I don't need to drive. I hate driving in winters. So if I can bike or walk, and I'm happy to be at that place.
Great. Thank you, Basha. Write it all down. Tom.
I have two comments, and then I can go through my list too. But first one being is I do want to, I guess, summarize a little bit the idea that Basha just brought up. Was I think not maybe festivals to the degree that we're thinking of, like the Old Port Fest, but programming in general and having a green space where we can offer farmers market, that congregation point that brings the community together. I think there's a lot of value there from a commercial perspective as well. As like a business owner, and looking at, if I was to look at this space as a potential, place where I would take up a lease and place my business, if I knew that there was a, heavy amount of high traffic programming that was going to happen in an adjacent area, that would be an attractive reason for me to sign a lease. Knowing that, 3 times a year, there's a winter fest, there's a winter carnival, there's, the new Old Port Fest. If those types of things were on the agenda, that would be a draw from a business owner standpoint. And I think, for as much as we talk about them, and yeah, they'd be nice for the community, they'd also be nice for the businesses. So I think that there's a lot of value from both sides, and we should probably not underestimate what that type of programming could have as an impact from a lot of those perspectives. So just my 2 cents on that. My other note, I think, the Ferris wheel keeps coming up here. And I think from a marketability standpoint for this entire area, obviously there's going to be a great story if we revitalize that, the grandstand. There's this sort of great, the news could really pick up on that. But at the same time, if we had, it doesn't have to be a Ferris wheel, but if we had something like that was a draw, I think that, again, as a business owner and as a member of this town, that's a real reason for me to kind of stand on the edge of my seat a little bit and say, maybe this is something that's worth paying attention to. There's a Ferris wheel. I can see the ocean. I can see Mount Washington. I can see the Portland Old Port from here. I mean, I think it's a lot of flat land here in Scarborough, so we might be able to see a lot more than we think. But to have something like that is a little outside the box and a little bit of, maybe it is just, a shameless PR attempt. It might carry some weight, and it might actually spread the word in a good way, that this is a place that's, it's got a brewery, but it's also kid friendly kind of thing. So I think we should not kind of underestimate that too. So to go to my list, I guess, I'm really hopeful that we can my mindset towards this has been, how do we frame this as an opportunity for people to not have to go to Portland? How can we compete more specifically, I guess, with the dining and nightlife options that Portland offers? If we could create a little micro cluster for restaurants and for, even if it's just drinks, something that would give people who are from maybe the Biddeford, Saco, Scarborough, maybe even South Portland area, a reason not to have to drive into Portland and deal with the parking and the masses and the tourists and that sort of stuff. Have a little sort of alternative option. That was really sort of first on my list, kind of dining specifically. And then that going into my something harebrained to attract some attention, and then some sort of market. I really want to see something that, whether that's just the green space being used on the weekends as a new farmers market, or sort of a shared space that can have sort of subleases. I always get kind of drawn back to the Portland Public Market, and I know that there were some challenges involved in that project that I'm not honestly too familiar with, but that concept I've seen work really well in a lot of other municipalities. And I kind of like that being a center point for some of these areas to allow, it really becomes sort of a highlight of the local area. If you have all these, we have a lot of, makers and farms here in Scarborough that don't really have a place to showcase themselves together. And that would be a good way to sort of aggregate everybody into a small area. And then somebody from out of town comes in and they can sort of see a, full representation of what our town offers in a quick and easy way to digest and enjoy in a way that, a little bit of live music, a little bit of, food samples. And I think that could go a long way to really adding to the atmosphere in that sort of area. So that's me.
Sarah.
I'm like having a panic attack at the thought of a Ferris wheel in town. So I just, I'm like starting to get ahead. No, but I think it's, I guess what I think of is less like specific businesses and more the tone. And I think what you said, Tom, like an alternative to Portland is kind of what I had wrote down, what I was envisioning. But there's a limit, right? We want to attract people, but we don't want it to become this overwhelming tourist attraction. Then anyone local is like, I don't actually want to go there because it's crazy and there's no place to park. And so I think there's obviously a balance. I don't know what that balance is. I think some of the, just going back to like the vibe and the tone, I agree, outdoor space, having live music, dog friendly. I think, if COVID has taught us, anything, it's like we can do everything we want to do outside. We can dine outside with the right equipment and the right space. And just, I just envision people walking down the streets with coffee, popping in for a cocktail somewhere, popping in somewhere else for a meal, and sort of smaller restaurants or environments, similar to what you would have in Portland. And so, that's just kind of the idea or what I was thinking. I also agree with the concept of a market. I think, being able to showcase smaller businesses in a consolidated way, I think is really important. And then the other thing, just go back to the family friendly that, has been brought to my attention just through the school board is playgrounds. So all the playgrounds that we have today at the schools are, for the most part, pretty tired. They're obviously used quite heavily. And we're working on making them more accessible. But there is a need and a huge opportunity for like a big, awesome playground that is also accessible in many different ways. So that could be, an opportunity to attract kids and families, which I think we all probably want it to be a family-friendly space. So just some ideas for me.
Thank you, Sarah. Kim?
Not to, lump onto the Portland Public Market thing, but you can tell Tom and I were talking today. But definitely the Portland Public Market or something like that. And I was envisioning using part of the grandstand for something like that, so it could be year round, and potentially have some activities in there in the winter as well. I was talking to someone today that said she grew up in Scarborough, and every Sunday they used to have a huge flea market in the Downs building, in the grandstand. They haven't done that for forever, but she said that like everybody in town went. So I was thinking, the other thing that I think, because I live here and I want to go out for a walk on Saturday morning, or I want to go out for dinner on Saturday night, and I don't want to drive to Portland. It's just that entertainment and food and beverage activity place. not like a rock row or anything like that. I'm thinking more like, if you've ever been to Blue in Portland, it's a little jazz club on Congress Street, or even Longfellow. I mean, you don't get more than 100, 150 people in there, and it's done at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, something like that for entertainment. The other thing that I was thinking about, and this would possibly take advantage of some of the Scarborough's outdoor activities. And since I used to work at Beans, I don't know what the brewery, I can't remember what the brewery is in Freeport, the big one. But
Maine Beer Company.
yeah, Maine Beer, they host bike rides after work. Like they have like bike clubs that go out of their parking lots, and then they have beers after, or group runs or something like that. And can we do bike or ski rentals, or is there something like that we could have inside the Downs that could take advantage of just the greater Scarborough? Plus there'll be a lot of trails inside the Downs itself. And that also goes into like lawn activities like pickleball, or I know they do outdoor yoga and exercise classes in Memorial Park, but could that move down here? And maybe the skating rink as well in the winter. So you have those kinds of activities, or maybe something like a Friday night carnival inside. And I would like to see some sort of a civic footprint, not a full extension of the campus, but maybe the library is great, something like that. Maybe not in the grandstand, but in other areas. So, and an overarching thing, it needs to be safe, it needs to be walkable, it needs to be visually attractive and clean and neat to attract us, and walkable.
Kim, I'll provide a link, but my community services director last month sent me a link to a town that I think they contract with a company that comes in and puts up an outdoor rink in the winter.
Yeah.
And it's on a common space, and that space is green space in the summer. That's kind of a cool idea, to be able to draw people year round.
Hey, we could bring roller skating back outside. Who knows,
If we could excuse my ignorance just for a minute, how do we handle sort of the town event planning, just from a general sense? Like, how does that, how would that overlap? Like, how would the public versus private sector sort of overlap in a situation like this, where there might be, uses on both fronts? If there was something like a rink, for example, how would that go about happening from a town's perspective?
Well, frankly, if there's a 3 or 4 acres of green space, whatever it is, that could be actually deeded to the town and become town property.
Yeah.
So we would own, operate, and maintain. I mean, that's one model. There certainly could be public-private partnership as well. But for my part, I would love the town to have some ownership interest, and what comes with that is responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Great.
Bridget?
I'll go. To piggyback on what you just said, Tom, my understanding is what they did in Mashpee, it was really important for the Mashpee developer to have a town presence. And so I think they deeded some land which the library was put on. So it's owned by the town, but it's kind of, it's not right in the commons. It used to be part of the commons, and there was like a land exchange of some sort. So I love the skating rink idea. I love to skate, so I'm a little biased, but I'd love to see a real skating rink with boards and, that could be put up and taken down. And I think that, that would attract kids, and it would also attract parents, and parents could, heated seating area outside of Lone Pine. They could sit and have their beer and watch their kids skate. The other thing that was interesting about Mashpee Commons, which was different than I was expecting, but the town doesn't actually do anything in the commons other than issue liquor licenses. But a lot of nonprofits do. So the nonprofits work with the commons to use their property to hold events. So like a Halloween walk and Easter egg hunt and those kinds of things. So there's an opportunity to bring in some of the nonprofits into that as well. You know, I'd like to see, yeah, outdoor space, you know, maybe a, you know, farmer's market in the summer and a Christmas market, you know, in the wintertime. And, you know, there's German outside Christmas markets everywhere in Germany, and it's cold. So I think we could handle it, you know, here. And Providence, Rhode Island has that, they have the river and they have like the fire floating down the river, but at that same time, they have all these booths where artisans sell their, so I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. I'd like to see the arts, and I think we're all starved for live music, but I think we're starved for visual arts as well. It would be nice to have, whether it be part of the grandstand, but an area where the arts could prosper. And yeah, and that was kind of my things. Just, you know, I envision like going there, parking, like, you know, either getting a cup of coffee, buying a Mother's Day card, maybe walking in a surf shop, you know, having lunch, like it, you know, a real spot where, you know, you want to stay for a while.
Great, thank you, Kim. Art, do you want to jump in? Do you have a list?
Sure. I mean, I kind of echo a lot of the similar thoughts. I think a multifunction cultural center that provides a lot of the examples that many of you have mentioned. It could have indoor, outdoor arts experiences, whether it's movies or plays, you know, Shakespeare in the park, or I'm thinking of a mini Boston, you know, how Portland's a mini Boston. Well, we could be a mini Portland, although I hate that term. A Ferris wheel, I like that idea. I was thinking of a carousel in honor of the Downs. A safe park-like cool down zone, you know, during the summertime that has some minor water attractions just to help keep the kids cool while mom and dad can stay in the shade and tip one back. But a multi-functioned event center, cultural center. You know, the hockey rink, I love the idea if it's outdoors, but it's so short-lived. It has to serve many purposes. It could be the farmer's market during the spring and summertime and fall. It could be an arts in the park example, but it could all be combined and connected with supporting businesses and land. I think of the town square in Back to the Future, you know, kind of that kind of center, you know, it's a nice little fountain, grass, so you could do different things of that nature. Again, I don't want it to be a full draw, you know, like a Portland, but you know, I was half kidding that if we could steal the Red Claws, I'd take them in a heartbeat. And I think one of the centerpieces would be the grandstand to have that iconic building. Or, you know, I just went by the new Children's Museum and I was like, I hadn't been that way in a long time. I was like, wow, you know, it just stood out. It's beautiful, you know, driving by at 55. But so those are some of my thoughts.
Great. Thanks, Art. And I think, I mean, this went exactly how I hoped it would, where at least one theme, and I'll do my list too, but this is my lead into it. At least one theme has emerged very clearly from everybody who spoke. This concept of a central congregation space, right? Which doesn't necessarily line up with the very first concept draft that we saw from the developers, but a sense of whether it's a common green or some kind of space that's kind of the cross section of activity for the downtown, where there could be an ice skating rink in the center of this space that you can see from every angle, where you're sitting at a restaurant or shopping, or your kids are playing on a playground. That it could be a public market that's in the center of this downtown. So when you're crossing from point A to B, you're crossing through some space that is, maybe ideally owned by the town, where there's something going on that's for everybody. I think that's it's exactly what I kind of had in my mind, and I think everybody has helped sort of develop it and draw it out a little bit more. But the sense that in the middle of this downtown, there's a middle of this downtown that people cross and can watch things happening from their seats at a restaurant or a bar or whatever. So that's my point number one. And I'm just so glad to hear that it's kind of the same vision that everybody else has in some form or another. I guess my point number two is maybe a little bit more specific, but it gets to that that conversation about what can we offer that is maybe more appealing to people around here, or at least appealing to them that they won't bother to go into Portland. And I think the benefit that we have of developing this property post-COVID and with an enormous amount of land is that we can focus on doing more things outside that you can typically only do inside if you're going into Portland. And so my thought for that specifically, and I was inspired by the Sacramento project that Tom had forwarded to us, but it's this sense of coverage that if you're visiting the direct downtown and maybe you're in a microcluster like Tom had talked about, of restaurants and breweries or shopping or whatever, that there's physical coverage over a part of that downtown. So it will allow for walking and dining and visiting maybe from spot to spot in that downtown outside throughout more of the year. And there's the ability to create some climate control in that coverage. So that's a more specific thing, but it just really, when I looked at that Sacramento project, and I know that part of that is repurposing facilities already there. Same with Thompson's Point. They had that coverage in place already, and it's an expense that, maybe asking someone to make that they don't want to, but it's, if we want to create a unique place that competes with downtowns that develop themselves ago, I think thinking about how to make people comfortable outside is an enormous feature benefit that we'll spend more time on. And the third thing that I had on my list that I think contributes nicely to that sort of, again, what Tom was talking about, public market and small businesses and makers, is just the means of making the space friendly for incubators and for startups and for people who may need non-traditional workspace, whether that means sort of shared workspace, like you see with Cloudport and other places that have popped up over the past few years. In particular, all of the people who are working from home permanently, but might need 10 hours where they can go lock themselves in an office. And people who are just getting started and can't afford their own space. I think that it creates a lot of diversity in the downtown. It creates a lot of youth and excitement to have people who are either just getting started or who are going for a length of time every day. So, whatever tools that we can incorporate to encourage incubators and startups. And I do think, frankly, just the fact of having a public market and encouraging the public to come find things like this is a tool to encourage startups and incubators. But that's sort of my third point. And I will just mention, I might smirk when I'm saying this, but our biggest debate may end up being the Ferris wheel, and I'm supportive. I think whether it's a Ferris wheel or some other unique attraction, I see that, Sarah, and I get it. I get that there are insurance questions to be considered. Maybe it's the Dragon's Descent like they have at Funtown. But something you can't find anywhere else is, again, we have the space to do this, and it's rare, and we have a lot of interest. And so I do think that some kind of maybe gimmicky, maybe not, but sort of flagship event that you can't find anywhere else is a great idea. So that's sort of my brain dump on the subject. Does anybody else want to talk about this anymore? I mean, we still have some time, and I think it opened great conversation. Tom?
I've got just one comment. I think we've brought up the Portland Public Market a number of times as the example for sort of that mixed market, small rental spaces. But I think maybe the tone I'm kind of getting from everybody, I mean, first of all, the Portland Public Market didn't last too long, so maybe we shouldn't use that as the example, but I'm thinking more like, it kind of hit me like a bolt of lightning, like Faneuil Hall in Boston, I think is a little bit maybe more the tone we're going for, where it's, there is that sort of everything. Faneuil Hall is the attraction. You go through, there's, you can get pizza, there's a number of different opportunities for, small businesses to occupy, a smaller amount of space, pay less to, so there's a lower barrier to entry for them to have a front-facing business. And then you go outside and it's, there's street performers and, retail, and it's all sort of, it's within one tiny little area, and it attracts so many people. So, I mean, that I think maybe might be a better example for what we might be going for here.
Yeah, just to be fair, my idea with the Ferris wheel was tongue in cheek. So I'm just interested to hear that it's actually resonates.
It's too late. It's too late, Tom. You can't stop it.
But I really
Right.
I applaud you all in your creativity here. But I'm going to channel my best Bruce Zivik right now. I mean, all of this has to match with reality, and someone has to pay the bills. And so, Tom, I really appreciate your point about the Portland Public Market. I love the space. I love what it was when it was thriving, but it wasn't successful financially.
Mhm.
It was funded heavily by Lieber Foundation, as I recall. So at the end of the day, it's got to be sustainable. And so the Faneuil Hall model is more of a business-focused model, right? And so that's but this sort of visioning is really important. Let the developers figure out how to make it financially viable.
Sarah?
Yeah, another example, and I've actually shared this with Rocky and Dan a couple of years ago now, is called the Stanley Marketplace. It's outside of Denver. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. I'll go ahead and send you guys some link. I visited there, thought it was incredible, and then did a bunch of digging, and I have information that I've sent to Rocky and Dan in the past. But it's a similar model. So it was an old, they tested ejector seats from airplanes, and it was kind of out in the middle of nowhere in this little suburb of Denver, and they basically turned it in. It's called the Marketplace, and there's a couple of restaurants in there. It's 2 floors, but it's open, and there's pop-in shops and artisans, and it's just a really cool idea. And I think it's a balance maybe between Faneuil and the Portland Public Marketplace, and it's incredibly successful. So I will send out links, and you guys can have a look at that.
Great, thank you. Anybody else on this? I do think it is a good idea, Tom, for us to do our best to, happy to work on this with you, to collate all this into something written down that we can deliver to Rocky and Dan to share with their developers before we even start to talk with them. I think it's been incredibly useful. I hope everybody else does too.
I just want to make one other point. I think, at least for me, it's important to me that the space meets the needs of all age groups. So, we have, a retiree community and older people, and they're probably not going to go to the space late at night, and they're probably not going to go on Saturdays when there's 1,000 kids running around. But like when you think about during the day, like what make sure that the mix attracts them as well.
That's a great point. Yeah, Scarborough has one of the highest average ages, median ages in the state, and we're of course the grayest state in the nation. So we'd be foolish not to be thinking about that huge segment of our population.
Just to build on Kim's point, I think it might be worthwhile at some point to meet with the town's senior advisory committee just to kind of get some feedback, because I feel like, you know, having some senior representation or getting some seniors feedback throughout this, and they're very much focused on programming, activities, things like that. So I think it's just a group that really does have a lot of ideas and probably would really appreciate the outreach by this committee to get some insight and feedback.
It's a great idea. Maybe we should invite them or a spokesperson to join us at an upcoming meeting. If not the next one, the one after. I'd like to do it sooner than later. Anything else on this subject tonight? That also does remind me, John, you had asked us to have a brief conversation, if we're ready to move into committee discussion and other questions, about appealing to the town council for more time, which clearly we have to do. We're about 5 weeks away from our originally scheduled deadline. This is where I'm certainly not an expert. I would ask for you and Tom to maybe give recommendations on if it's time to make that appeal, what does it look like? Tom?
I might suggest let's get the consultant on board and get a better sense of what their timeline is, because I think a lot of this depends on them. So before you ask for an extension to a certain date, I think it ought to be informed by what that timeline looks like. So the council knows it's coming. I think they're going to be very receptive, particularly when we have some details around that extension request.
John, anything else?
I guess I would just add, not knowing the timeline to Tom's point, which is probably really important to get, again, just knowing summertime's coming up, I think you guys also might want to think about, timing and maybe your meeting cadence after you have that too. Because again, I think we do want this time bound, right? We don't want this to go on for too long, but we also want to be realistic of, it's going to be summertime soon. You guys are going to have a lot of things going on personally, I'm sure. So how do we want to take that into account going forward as well?
Yeah, I think when we get a sense of the design company's plan and schedule, it may be that we take a break. I think that's for us to consider after we've had a chance to talk to them about their approach and how long they think it might take. So to be continued. Any other committee items, discussion, questions unrelated to what we've talked about tonight?
Travis, I just want to circle back. Did I hear you volunteer to try to synthesize the visioning to see, to pluck out the common themes?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it, Tom.
Okay.
I'll try and have something ready for everybody to see before our next meeting in 2 weeks.
I took some notes, so I'm pleased to collaborate. If you want to take a crack, I'm pleased to assist.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I think we have this on YouTube. I'll probably rewatch it to try and collect as much as I can. But I'll take a crack and I'll try to have something in advance of our next meeting so everyone's had a chance to look at it. Anything else? Any other committee items? Doesn't look like it. So for our next agenda, we're going to want to get into housing with the developers. We're going to ask them to present to us, and everybody should come loaded with questions. And I think it'll be useful for us to try and figure out, what lane we have to play in that conversation. So let's put that on. Tom?
Is there anything we can do to prepare ourselves for that conversation? Is there any literature we could be pointed towards, or anything that we can do to just have an idea of, what kind of questions we should be asking?
By tomorrow, I think we're going to have a special spot on our website that will have all the growth management ordinance, not all of it, but as best we can, related information. So that would be a resource if you want to start to educate yourself. I think I would recommend this committee. What I think would be most helpful for the developer is for them to help us all appreciate how important housing is to the overall development, kind of how how it's all integrated. I think that might be the biggest takeaway that you can focus on, given your limited time to dig into this.
Mhm.
Some of you may choose to dive really deep, and I'll make sure to share a link out when we have that up and running this week. Okay.
Great. Yeah, I think you're right, Tom, and I think that's how we should ask them to prepare to talk to us, is housing in relation to within and directly around the downtown itself. And we can, you know, if the conversation goes further than that, we can take it further. So that's on our agenda. Should we ask, to John's suggestion, should we try and get some feedback from Senior Advisory Council at our next meeting? I think we probably will have time. Some more early feedback before we start working with the consultant. And that's probably a pretty good schedule.
I think that's a great idea, Travis.
Okay, great. John, would you mind extending that invitation?
Yep, I can do that.
Copy me and that'd be
Mhm.
perfect. All right. So we have our agenda set, public comment. I don't see anybody in the attendee list.
No.
I have not received anything this week. So that closes our public comment period. Welcome, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded. I don't think we
Second.
need to vote. We're adjourned. Thanks for giving up your Tuesday night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night, everyone.
Go, Sarah.
night.
Quick.
Have a good night.
Go, Sarah. I think it's just the sun is setting.
Yeah.